have to tell you, I've been working for 40 years in environmental consulting. I started in 1978 at Jack McCormick and Associates in Berwyn, Pennsylvania. For the next few years, I worked there and at a couple of other places. And then for the past 35 years, I've worked at Schmidt & Company. I belong to a number of professional and scientific organizations. I'm certified as a senior ecologist by the Ecological Society of America and certified as a professional wetland scientist by the Society of Wetland Scientists. For the past 25 years, I have also volunteered with my local Environmental Advisory Council in Schuylkill Township, Chester County. Now, when I started working in the late 70s, it was an exciting time. It was just after the start, really, of the modern environmental movement. And in 1970, a major piece of federal legislation was passed, NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. That was passed requiring that any major federal activity have an environmental impact assessment performed. Also in 1970, the Clean Air Act was passed. In 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed. In 1977, major amendments to the Clean Air Act were passed. See, I have a sheet here, a couple of things I missed. The Endangered Species Act was passed in 1973. And of course, 1970 was the year of the first Earth Day. So a lot was going on. A lot of new laws were passed, but laws by themselves don't really do anything. You need to have regulations. And so the agencies were busy at that time promulgating and implementing regulations. What's going on there? And some of the agencies were just coming into being. The EPA was formed in 1970. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, was formed in 1970. Some of the other agencies had been around already: U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, Office of Surface Mining. But all of them were getting busy in the 70s, writing new regulations and starting to implement these new environmental programs. And at the state level, the same thing was happening in Pennsylvania and other states. In Pennsylvania, in 1970, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Resources was formed. And the following year, in 1971, Pennsylvania adopted the Environmental Rights Amendment to the Constitution, a major piece of legislation or part of the Constitution that only today is finally seeing some real teeth in it. DER, 25 years later in 1995, then was split into Pennsylvania DEP and the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, DCNR. Which are the two agencies we have today in Pennsylvania. In 1970 also, the New Jersey DEP was formed, and the New York State DEC was formed. Both of them, I'm not sure about DER, but both of those, New York and New Jersey, their agencies were formed on Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970. And some other agencies. 1977, FERC came into being, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and in 1979, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So all of this was happening in the same decade. Now, what I've been doing for the past 40 years has mostly focused on wetlands and water resources. I do a lot of wetland delineation mapping, on-site delineations, environmental inventories, site planning and assessment. Occasionally I do some wetland mitigation. A lot of what I do has to do with the regulations that were passed under these environmental laws, the federal and state laws. So I help permit applicants write their permit applications and submit them, coordinate with the agencies. There's a lot of regulatory review and analysis. impact assessment is a part of it, and occasionally I'm called upon to do expert testimony. And so here's kind of the kinds of projects. I've worked on all kinds of projects: residential, commercial, industrial development, coal mines, pipelines, fracking issues, oil and gas extraction, roads and railroads. Clients also are all over the place. I work for builders and project proponents. I work for conservation groups and environmental organizations that sometimes are opposing projects. I've worked for municipalities and state and federal agencies. But whoever I'm working for, I'm always trying to do really two things, always the same things. And one is inventory. I want to know exactly what's on a property or a project site, what the resources are, the wetlands, the streams, the quality. You have to know what's there. And then the second thing, of course, is what is this project, what's this proposed project going to do to those resources, the impact assessment. So whether I'm working for the builder or the people fighting the building, I'm still trying to get things right on the ground and evaluate the project. And hopefully, if I'm working for a builder, I'm trying to focus them in on lessening the impact that the first plan might have had and avoid and mitigate any impacts they can. So that's what I do. And maps. Maps is a big part of what I do. I've always loved maps. When I first got my driver's license, I used to take a road map and just get lost and drive around. Of course, gas was a lot cheaper then, but I'd drive around places I'd never been and find my way back by the maps. We'd go camping and I'd go hiking on trails trying to find my way by the maps. So I've always liked maps, and maps are really important to what I do in environmental consulting because there are a lot of very important resource maps that I'm always using on most every project. There's a USGS topographic quadrangles, the National Wetlands Inventory maps that were prepared by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Those are probably not as useful as they could be, but they weren't meant to be site specific, and they give you a general idea of where major wetlands might be. But you always need to look at those maps before you go out to a site because you want to know where there's possibly going to be a wetland. FEMA floodplain maps are important. The USDA soil survey maps, every county in Pennsylvania has a soil survey map, and those are remarkably accurate, and they're very important to what I do. Then there's always tax maps, property maps, and when a project is prepared, you get the engineers drawing site plans and surveys. The problem with all these maps is that they're all produced at different scales, or at least back in the day they were. And so you have to get them all to a common scale to figure out what's going on. And we used, this was before computer-assisted graphics, and so we used drafting tables and light tables, ink on Mylar. We would prepare these overlays that we put together. Once we got them all to the same scale, we put them together on a light table and look through them all and say, okay, where's the wetland? What is this parking lot? How close is it? Is it going to impact the wetland? And you had to do this all manually to figure out what was going on. But now we live in the digital age, and things are wonderful, or at least a lot easier. And so one big part of the digital age is GPS, Global Positioning Systems. And that involves the satellites that are flying around above the planet in fixed orbits and sending signals to each other and back to reference points on the ground, and being picked up by whatever receiver sends a signal up to them. There may be surveyors are using that. Everybody's relying on GPS with their smartphones, and it's all just to figure out where you are at any given moment, or what is where on the face of the earth. And the GPS data that we get from the satellites is really just one element that factors into GIS systems, Geographic Information Systems. And Geographic Information Programs have been developed to handle all of this digital information for mapping, for data storage, for spatial analysis, which is where it really comes in is important to me for environmental analysis, and information sharing. So all of this spatial data, it takes these different layers of information that we used to have to put on a light table, get to the same scale, and look down through. Now it's all done digitally. I mean, to me, it's almost magical, because like I was saying to somebody before, I know how to drive a car, but I don't know how it all works, And so I don't know how all this works, but it all comes together, and it brings all of this information together. And basically, there's two kinds of files in this spatial data. And one is raster files. And those are basically images, photographs with pixels. And so if you have a lot of pixels, you have better resolution. But eventually, as you zoom in on that, it gets pixelated, and all you see is the pixel, the individual pixels. And then there's vector files. And those are just simply points and lines and shapes, polygons. And shapefiles are one kind of vector file. So now we're finally getting into what a shapefile is. So a shapefile is a vector file that's used in GIS programs. Probably the most popular GIS program is ArcMap or ArcGIS, which was developed by ESRI, Environmental Systems Research Institute out in California. And ESRI actually developed shapefiles. They're the ones who develop shapefiles. But it's not proprietary, and there's lots of other GIS software programs that also, all of them use shapefiles. And Global Mapper by Blue Marble happens to be the program I use, not because it's necessarily the best program, but it's one that we got. It was fairly reasonably priced. In my office we got that, and we've been using it for, 5 or 6 years now. And I'm used to it, it works for me. There are other, like I say, there's other software programs here. Some of them are free, some of them have a little cost involved. Probably most of them are cheaper than the ESRI, ArcMap and ArcGIS. And my son, when he was going to college, he took a course and he was using the ESRI, the ArcMap program. And I was looking into it a little bit because I thought, hey, he's got it for free. I might as well see what it's like. But after using Global Mapper for so many years, it just didn't seem user-friendly to me. Now, I'm sure people using it all the time, feel differently about it. I'm sure it's a great program. It obviously is because it's so popular. But there's lots of programs out there, and they all use shapefiles in one way or another. So what exactly is a shapefile? Basically, like I said, it's a vector file. It's a digital file that's used to store information. And it stores location and attribute information. And basically, the information it's storing are points, lines, and polygons. And shapefile is kind of a misnomer because one shapefile actually is made up of several files. It needs at least these 3 mandatory files, a .shp, which is the basic shapefile, main file, .shx, which is an index file, .dbf, which is a database file, and that defines some of the attributes. And then there's other kinds of files like .prj, which I'm surprised it's not a mandatory file because that's probably one of the more important ones in my mind, because that contains the projection information, the coordinate information that allows a shapefile to automatically go right to where it is in the world on your map. And then there's other files, .sbm and SBX. These are the most common files, but there can be another half dozen kind of files. And all of these files, which constitute a shapefile, have to be stored in one directory on your computer in your GIS program. And all of these shapefiles and a lot of digital information is available. Most of the states these days are providing kind of repositories for all of this information. In Pennsylvania, the main repository is PASDA, the Pennsylvania Spatial Data Access Clearinghouse, which is hosted really by Penn State. And the address there is at the bottom of the slide. And you can get all kinds of information from PASDA. You can get images, aerial photographs, stream info, I mean, really anything that's produced digitally you can get there. Another source of Pennsylvania information is EMAP-PA, which is really, I guess, hosted by the Pennsylvania DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection. And that has some of the same information that PASDA has. It also has some DEP permitted facilities. You can find those all around the state. New Jersey has a similar place called, and theirs is called the GIN, New Jersey Geographic Information Network. And it's the same as the PASDA site in Pennsylvania, but it has New Jersey information. So, you know, the way you use these shapefiles, the way I use them, you know, if I have a project site I'm interested in, I will create a global map or, you know, program project specific to that. And I'll start maybe with just a basic map, the counties of Pennsylvania, if I'm looking at something in Pennsylvania. So I'll start out with the counties of Pennsylvania. To that, I might bring in major watershed boundaries. And like I say, the beauty, the magic of these GIS files and these shapefiles is that they just snap right in. You don't have to try to line them up. They just go right there. They know from the attribute information contained in them, they know the coordinates, and so this is exactly where things are. And as you zoom in on them, you don't lose clarity, you don't lose precision. So you might have a basin. And then you can play around with the shapefiles. You can add colors to them, and you can highlight, you know, so here you highlight the Delaware River Basin in light blue. Or maybe you want municipalities. So you start with the county map, you add into them all the municipalities in the county. And maybe you want to focus in on a particular county. So here we have Chester County, and you focus in all the municipalities in Chester County. And then, again, maybe you want to focus even further on a specific municipality. This is Schuylkill Township, that's where I live, in northern Chester County, right along the Schuylkill River. So then you can focus in on a particular township, and you can keep zooming in, and you can get information and overlay information on that. You might want to put streams on there. So the major stream running through Schuylkill Township is the Pickering Creek, and that's about 75% of Schuylkill Township is in the Pickering watershed, and that's a high-quality special protection stream. Maybe you don't want streams, you want to see roads, and so these are the PennDOT state roads in Schuylkill Township and vicinity. And you can bring in local roads. You can throw in the USGS quadrangles, and you know, you just show an area on your screen and ask it to import the quadrangles, and it brings them all in, all lined up. I mean, again, I think this is just wonderful. Kids today probably think this is, you know, old hat. This is how it is, but it's not how it was. So, you know, that's very useful information to get the USGS map, and then, you know, you zoom in on that and you can get more detail. So, but maybe you're interested in a particular property. Maybe there's a project proposed there, so you get an outline of the property, maybe from a tax map, you know, or some other source, and then you can focus in on that property. And this happens to be a property right along Pickering Creek Reservoir, and it is proposed for development. But these air photos, you know, again, this is wonderful because you can just bring in an air photo, and this happens to be a 2015 air photo provided by DVRPC, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. On PASDA, they have DVRPC air photos from 2005, 2010, and 2015, as well as air photos from, you know, other parts of the state and other sources of information. There are other places you can get historic aerial photos. Sometimes they're digital and sometimes they're not. And if you don't have a digital photograph, you have to manually rectify it. And that's, you know, where you get back to the way it used to be with the old paper map things, where you have to rectify it. So a lot of times, you know, a project like this one here, the plans are drawn up and you can rectify something like this pretty easily because there's the property boundaries, you know, the corners of the property. You can get common points. So, you know, you get common points on the engineer's drawing, and, you know, you get that point, and you get that point on your map, you know, my map of just the outline of the property, and you get all of those common points, and you read those into the system, and then it rectifies a map that's not a digital map. And so you can get that in there, but it would be easier if you just had the digital file for those maps. And most engineers today are putting their site plans together with computers. Computer-assisted drafting is CAD, and AutoCAD is a popular program a lot of engineers use. So they're designing their projects on their computer, and the output of their plan, their site plans, they can print it out, obviously, but it's also a digital file with a format. AutoCAD anyway has a format of .dwg, and these are compatible with GIS programs. Again, I'm not certain how it all works, but it either can be turned into a shapefile or at least can be used like a shapefile. So you can, you know, get these site plans in digital format to snap right to where it is on the ground that you're looking at. And yeah, that's what I just said. So these are nice because they, you know, just, you don't have to try to rectify it manually. If it's a digital form and a shapefile form, you can just read it right into your GIS program and you have it. So something like that is especially useful on a large project. And one project I've worked on is the Mariner East 2 pipeline. And that's a large project. It's 306 miles long, crosses 17 counties in southern Pennsylvania, going from Washington County on the west to Delaware County on the east. And the little green dot over there on the right is in West Whiteland, Chester County, near Exton. And if you just had a paper map of this pipeline route and you wanted to see what's going on at that dot, you would blow it up, and it would get larger, but it doesn't get any more detailed. It doesn't give you any better information when you blow up a paper map or, you know, a manually drawn map. Whereas a digital map and with a shapefile. Now I have an aerial photo as a base map, and the purple lines are the Mariner East 2 pipeline, and the yellow shading is workspaces, additional workspaces. So in the first shot there, you can see, it's kind of hard to see, but it looks like just one line. But as you zoom in, and this is the green dot stays in the same place. Here's Route 100. As you zoom in, you have this little cul-de-sac, Valley View Drive. And as you zoom in even further, there's Valley View Drive. You can actually see now that you have two pipelines, because the Mariner East pipeline project is two parallel pipelines, a 16-inch and a 20-inch pipeline. And then as you zoom in even further, you get even greater detail. And you know, whether you're zoomed out or zoomed in, these pipelines, because it's a shapefile, they are exactly where they are. Whether it's here in Chester County or in Washington County or wherever you're looking, you zoom in on it and you can see exactly where it's crossing this guy's driveway and that road. And in this case, they're doing it underground. They're installing this pipe right here underground by horizontal directional drilling. They're going under. But the interesting thing about this particular location, well, we'll get to that, I guess, in So how are the shapefiles being used by the regulatory agencies? I mean, they've been very useful to me. How are the regulatory agencies using them? Well, the PNDI, the Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Inventory, is something that project applicants, proponents have to consult to find out if there are any threatened or endangered species in or near their project site. And the DCNR, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, who run the PNDI program, they, for large projects like these large pipeline projects, they want to know, they want you to tell them about your project with a shapefile. And I don't know if you can read it there, but the bottom yellow highlighted thing, it says that the following information may expedite the review process for your large project. And it says a GIS shapefile depicting the project extent. So they're asking for, and they're getting it. And, you know, these pipelines are providing PNDI folks with shapefile information of their project sites. And that's very helpful for the reviewers, for the Fish and Boat Commission and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, to find out where exactly this is in relation to where they know there are sensitive resources. And I first found out about, now, another pipeline project I had worked on was Penn East Pipeline. And this is a smaller, but still a large project. It goes from Luzerne County in Pennsylvania to Mercer County in New Jersey, and 115 miles long. And unfortunately, it was after I was done the work I was doing on that project that I found this piece of correspondence. And I didn't even know yet at this time. At this point in time, this is around 2016, I was starting to work on the Mariner East 2 project. But I found this correspondence in the Penn East file, and it was talking about these shapefiles that had been provided to the resource agencies. And this was back in 2014. And so I said, oh, well, you know, DCNR, they have the shapefiles. It would be helpful to me to have the shapefile. So I called DCNR up and I said, can I get a copy of the shapefiles? And the guy I talked to first said, well, I don't, you know, he didn't know if they had shapefiles or whatever. And so I pointed him to the correspondence and I said, you know, clearly you have them. I don't even want them for Penn East, but I assume you have them for Mariner East too. I'd like to get them. How can I do that? And, you know, we went back and forth a bit, and finally, you know, then they said, well, maybe you have to get it from DEP, because DEP is the one reviewing that project. We're not really a regulatory agency, we're a review agency. And so you have to ask DEP for it. So I asked DEP for the shapefiles for Mariner East 2. And first, they said, oh, we don't know what shapefiles are. And I kind of believe that, because they probably don't use the shapefiles. But I said, but your sister agency, DCNR, has them, and they use them, and they need them, and they're very important to them, and they'd be very important to me. And so, you know, can you get them for me? And they said, well, we don't know. You know, we have to ask the project sponsor if we can, you know, get them for you. And finally, they did. They did give me a shapefile of the Mariner East project, but it was Mariner East 1, and that was built like 80 or 90 years ago. And although Mariner East 2 is co-locating in large part with Mariner East 1, it's not everywhere. So it wasn't all that useful. It was good because it got me close, but I didn't even know where I wasn't close. You know, I didn't know where they were diverging. So finally, you know, I did get some correspondence. My client got correspondence from DCNR providing the shapefiles for the Mariner East 2. So we got it from DCNR, not DEP. They provided the shapefiles to my client, and they said, and I thought it was great that they actually said that these are public information. So I thought, well, that's a step in the right direction, because this is important, and it's important to establish that this is public information. It was submitted as part of the project application for Penn East and for Mariner East too. So it was good to hear them tell me that this was public information. So they gave it to us, but we thought it would be useful to other people too, and we tried to push them, well, can't you put it up on your website? DEP, to their credit, had recently, and I don't know exactly when it started, but a couple of years ago at least, as they were getting a lot of these pipelines coming down the pipe, they started a Pennsylvania pipeline portal on their website. And on there they have Mariner East 2, Atlantic Sunrise, and Penn East. And those are three big pipeline projects that they were reviewing at the time. And they have lots of information about all of them in digital form, the applications, the site plans, in at least PDF form. And they actually did, finally, in late August of 2016, DEP added some shapefiles to their pipeline portal for Mariner East 2. And that was helpful, but again, see, I don't think DEP still understood what a shapefile was. And they saw a shapefile and it said Mariner East, so they threw it up on their website. But when I went to it and I got the shapefile, it was only parts of the project. It was only the parts of the project that they were doing by HDD, horizontal directional drilling, not the whole pipeline route. So we pointed that out to them, and eventually they did actually put, in December then, 3 months later, they put out 2 shapefiles. And now, these were very helpful shapefiles. And one of them was the second one, not the one being pointed to there by the red arrow, but the second one was the actual route of the Mariner East 2 pipelines, each pipe. It showed all of the workspaces, so all of the limits of disturbance. And then the other file is this aquatic resources shapefile. And that was very helpful because that showed, and it was really three different things it was showing. One was all the ponds they had delineated along their pipeline route, all of the streams that they delineated within a corridor, not everywhere, but within about 200 feet on either side of their pipeline. They delineated streams and ponds and wetlands. And so that was very useful. And now this is interesting because these are the actual files of each of those 3 pieces of information. So you can see it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 files each for each shapefile. And they don't take up a lot of room. I mean, as you see on the right side of that slide, the size of these shapefiles is really very small. So it's not difficult to send this around or put it up. It's not going to take a lot of space on your server if you put it up on the website. And it's easy, very simple to just email around if you get a copy of them. So that's not the problem, is the size. But this was very helpful for Mariner East. It was very useful to have the shapefiles of the aquatic resources and also of the pipeline route itself. And so some of the kinds of analysis it allowed me to do, and anybody with a GIS program, and I would hope the DEP, if they were using these, you can throw things on there like, okay, here's the pipelines. I don't know exactly where this is, but here's the pipeline route. Here are NWI, National Wetland Inventory wetlands mapped along this section of the pipeline route. And how does that compare? So I can, follow along the route and see, have they mapped wetlands? Has Sunoco mapped wetlands where NWI found wetlands? And in this particular instance, they did. They did a pretty good job. And in fact, they found more wetlands in some cases than the NWI maps showed, which is not uncommon. I mean, NWI maps probably only get about 10% or so of all the wetlands out there. They're done from high altitude aerial photographs, and they're not the best resource. So the best way to do it is a field delineation. Sunoco had done that, and they provided that. So in this case, they actually found wetlands, even more wetlands than NWI showed. But in some places they didn't. They missed some wetlands, these files helped us know where they found wetlands and where perhaps we should go look to see where we think there might be wetlands that they didn't find wetlands. So that was one thing. Another thing we were able to do, another kind of analysis, and there's all kinds of stuff you can do once you have a shapefile, is here again. Now the green dot up in the left is that same green dot from before in Exton, Pennsylvania, and Chester County. But this is zoomed out a little bit to show what it's showing are these red dots. And the red dots here indicate wells, private water wells of people. And the source of this information is the Pennsylvania Groundwater Information System, PAGWIS, if you will. And so this is the database that Sunoco used to identify wells along the pipeline route. And they claim to have identified all of the wells, all of the private and public water supply wells within 150 feet of their pipelines. And the green outline there is a buffer that you can just, again, with these digital files, you just throw on a buffer, say, show me 150 feet on either side of this feature, and then boom, it shows it for the whole 300 miles. So there we have it. And in this particular segment, that database shows one red dot, one private well within this whole stretch of the pipeline. And it shows a bunch of wells, maybe under parking lots and things and under streets. I'm not sure about the accuracy of the wells location, but that's what the database shows, and that's what Sunoco relied on when they were doing their analysis of private wells. Well, back to this little green dot in Valley View Drive. As it turns out, everybody on Valley View Drive has a private well. They all do. There's 30 homes there. They're not all within this 150-foot corridor of the pipelines, but they all have private wells, and not one of them was shown on this database that Sunoco relied on. And in fact, when they installed that section of the pipeline, these folks on Valley View Drive all experienced problems with their water supply and their wells. And that became a big issue. I think they shut the project down for a short while. But all of the, just here there were 30 wells that they missed, because they were using, and they claimed that not only did they use the PAGWIS database, but they also did interviews with everybody along the route that they negotiated with, and they found out they knew where all the wells were. Well, they missed 30 right here. Another thing with wells, we just, in Westtown Township, the township had put together a map that we had to rectify to our GIS program, but they put together a map in a section of the township that this Mariner East 2 project was going through. And on this particular map, the heavy blue outlined properties all had private wells. But the red dots show the PAGWIS information, and that shows where PAGWIS shows private wells, and I think, again, it was only a very small percentage of the total actual wells that this database was showing. So, of course, kind of garbage in, garbage out. The reliability of the database is only as good as the information. But this is what, Sunoco was relying on to prevent problems to people's wells. This is just kind of interesting. We were looking at a section of the Mariner East 2 pipeline down in Delaware County, and we're looking, Sunoco had mapped several forested wetlands down in this section, right near Marcus Hook, where it ties in at the terminus. And they had done their mapping back in 2014, and we were looking here to try to see if they correctly identified wetlands as either forested or herbaceous wetlands. But when we got out there in 2017, we were looking around and it didn't quite look right. And we were following along. We said, yeah, that's where we are. Here we are. But somebody had gone and built a building in this wetland that Sunoco had identified as wetland, and they messed up this wetland down here. And it's just the kind of thing that you can pick up in an analysis if you're using these digital files. And we fortunately had the wetland information from Sunoco in shapefile form, so we could see that. We could get a Google Earth or whatever current photograph of the area, and you can see, what used to be wetland is now the back of the building. Just kind of a little aside. But so other large projects, Penn East, I said, that's really the correspondence on Penn East is what tipped me off to the fact that these shapefiles should be available. It was too late for the work I was doing, but I thought, well, let me go back and see if I can get the Penn East shapefiles. So in October of last year, I put in a right to know law request to DEP for the shapefiles, and I got a response from Harrisburg, and they didn't have them, and I got a response from the Northeast Regional Office, and they didn't have them. The Southeast Regional Office did have them, and they provided them to me. which was good, again, and I provided them around to everybody I know who's working on that project. But they didn't put them up on their pipeline portal website, so they're really not making it easy. And Atlantic Sunrise, another project I worked on, and I didn't have any shapefiles from the pipeline people when I was working on it. There's no shapefiles there, and I've been asking DEP for those shapefiles. I didn't do a right to know law request there, but I did ask them for the shapefiles, and they didn't provide them to me, and they haven't put them up on their website either. So, and that's the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline. Again, another large project that's 185 miles from Susquehanna County down to Lancaster County. So, what's needed now? What's the lesson from all this? And for me, I think it's that these shapefiles really are important. So somebody like me, an environmental consultant, who's trying to do analysis of some of these large projects, these shapefiles are being produced by the project proponent, by their engineers. And I think DEP needs to require not only that these applications come in with paper copies and now digital copies, which some, they're putting in some cases, they're putting up online, which I think is a great thing, but they should routinely be obtaining from the applicants shapefiles of the project extent and putting those up online as well. At least for the large projects. I mean, the smaller ones, like I said, if you have a little property, you can figure out the outlines of that easy enough on your own. But for these large projects, it's just immensely helpful to have the shapefile. DEP, I still don't know what they do internally in terms of using GIS programs to review these projects. I get the sense that they're really not using shapefiles. That's why they don't really know what they are. But they should. I mean, they really should start using shapefiles because I'm doing the kind of analysis that they should be doing. And then if they're not, then at least they should make these shapefiles available publicly. They should put them up online so people like me and anybody who has a GIS program, a free program even, can do these kinds of analysis that DEP and the other agencies really don't have the budget anymore or the resources to do, and we can help them. We can be their eyes and ears on the ground to point out possible problems. So that's the real value, and I think the same goes not just for DEP, but the feds obviously should also be getting these, FERC for the pipeline projects, and EPA and the Corps of Engineers for big projects, and even municipalities. I think a local project, as much of that information should be provided online, or at least to anybody who asks for it, in digital format, and shapefiles is one very easy thing to provide around. So that's it. That's the end of my little thing. Anybody have any questions?
I do have a question.
Yes.
You kind of answered it by saying you're analyzing the information they submit, but how do you validate the source? Like, they gave you the groundwater
Right.
layer, but how do you validate that what they gave you really is the groundwater layer? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
Do you just go build your own? You add your own layer? And
well, in the case of the water wells,
Yeah.
they said what they used as their source information. They said they used the Pennsylvania Groundwater Information System database that's available on PASDA. They
Right.
just out and
Right.
said that. So it was great. So we went and we got it. Anybody can get that.
So you can match it.
And we threw it on there, and we said, okay, I know so-and-so, Mrs. Smith, she's on a well, it's not shown.
Okay.
There were a couple of problems there. One was with the Pennsylvania, the database that's there. It's just not very reliable because it doesn't have nearly all wells. And then the second problem was that the applicant here was relying on that database as truth. And we were able to point out many instances where it wasn't right, and they kept insisting that they knew where all the wells were, but ultimately they shut down, and they had to actually go back before the DEP allowed them to start up again. They had to go back and within a 450-foot wide, I don't know if that's total or on each side, corridor, notify every landowner and ask them if they had a private well before they started
Okay.
working again.
Just a cynic in me wonders if they're not manipulating that data to, erase a couple wells.
Yeah,
That's
well,
where-
then again, having this stuff available, people who care to can check it out
Can
and
analyze
point it
it.
out, and then they're really in trouble if they're found to have manipulated it.
All right, thank you.
All right.
With respect to the PAGWIS data, I would just add that for the Westtown slide that Steve showed earlier, I think the accuracy we determined was about 2%.
Oh,
So, if it's 98% wrong, it's not telling you very much. Unfortunately, PAGWIS is a volunteer system. Licensed well drillers in the Commonwealth are supposed to report to the Bureau of Geology all of the wells that they drill in Pennsylvania, of which there are about 20,000 new ones every year. And that requirement, so-called, has been in place for 20 years now or more. However, there's no enforcement. So it's a completely voluntary system if a well driller chooses to send in his results.
Right. And those wells in the last 20 years are most of the ones that are in the PAGWIS system. And they even tell you, they'll tell you in the PAGWIS, in the intro to the database, they'll tell you that this is not a comprehensive thing and it doesn't have a lot of the older records.
okay.
The other thing that's interesting too is Pennsylvania is only one of 2 states, I think Alaska is the other one, that has no requirements for when you dig a private well, there's no requirements to show that the water meets any kind of water quality, parameters.
Okay.
So we're only one of 2, and Alaska is the other one. Maybe you can get away with it in
Right.
Alaska,
Right.
but I think Pennsylvania should have some sort of requirements.
But thus, then, the importance of the human analysis, right? To take what they're
Right.
presenting and analyze it.
And analyze
for
it,
truth.
yeah.
Okay.
And when that wasn't done, you had the very predictable result in the Mariner 2 East in southeastern Pennsylvania, that all of these people up and down the pipeline started reporting damage to their water supply. And so, in fact, the DEP shut the pipeline construction down for a little while and had a minor fine before they could go back to work, and it's back in construction again. So that's exactly what you would expect when the agency in that particular instance got deficiency letters from DEP that was questioning the water supply information, and the response from the applicant was negligible. They didn't really respond. And the DEP's reaction was to issue the permit. And so then all the damage came along that one would expect the permit process to identify in
Right.
advance if we're going to have a permit process.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm concerned about the wetlands in Philadelphia. Is there a list or a map of all the wetlands in Philadelphia? How cooperative is the Philadelphia Water Department? I attended a workshop earlier today on algae, and I know I've been monitoring the water in a place called Sailor Grove for the past 15 years. And I know that there are algae blooms there every year. I don't know anything about algae. This is the first workshop I attended on algae, but I don't know whether the water department is aware of algae blooms. Is there a map that shows algae blooms? I don't even know where all of the wetlands are, so
Yeah.
it's difficult for me to go look at them if I don't know where they are.
Right. I don't know anything about the water department and what they know or don't know about algae blooms. I do know about wetlands, And I'm pretty sure they have no map that shows where all the wetlands are in Philadelphia.
But
There's-
they've built some, because Sailor Grove is a man-made,
They've built a wetland?
yeah.
Oh, well, you know, then, and, you know, even that probably hasn't made it onto any, you know, official wetland maps, because they're really, wetlands are tough because, you know, I talked about the National Wetlands Inventory, and that was done by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, you know, 20, 30 years ago, from high altitude aerial photographs. It wasn't field verified in, you know, just a few places. But they weren't looking for regulated wetlands. They were looking for wetland habitats, you know, for managing for fish and wildlife.
Right.
So, you know, they're the only sort of national mapping that we have, and it's, you know, it's for every state and every place in Pennsylvania has a national wetland inventory map overlay to the USGS quadrangles. So that shows you where some wetlands are, or at least where some obvious areas of wetlands may be, and many of them may be developed now, you know, like in Philadelphia. But it's not a definitive source. You know, you really, there's no way to know precisely where a wetland is on a property unless you go out and look for the three parameters that define wetlands, which are plants, soils, and hydrology. And of those three, the hydrology is the most important, but it's the one it's hardest to find. Because it might not be there in the summertime. The wetland doesn't have to be wet year round. It only really has to be wet for a couple of weeks continuously during the growing season. And so, you know, a lot of people walk across a wetland and don't even realize it's a wetland. And so that's, you know, that's what makes it hard to regulate wetlands. But unfortunately, there's no good map. And unfortunately, when people do mapping of wetlands on a project site or a property or, you know, a pipeline, those, you know, and in many cases, I don't think in the case of the pipelines, but in many cases on smaller properties and project sites, the Corps of Engineers will come out and review the wetland delineation and confirm it as accurate. And now you have a confirmed wetland boundary on this property, but nobody except that property owner and people who care about that particular project know about it. It doesn't get uploaded to some, you know, master map of wetlands, you know, which could constantly be updated by all of these wetland delineations that all these consultants like Schmidt and Company and others are doing, you know. At least, you know, you would think the confirmed wetland boundaries, the ones that have been confirmed by either the Corps of Engineers or some state agency, should receive some official recognition and be uploaded to you know, some master shapefile, let's say. So, but they're not. So anyway, any more questions?
I think we're on time.
Is it possible to show on the shapefiles where algae blooms are in the state?
Well, I don't know if that's a database that somebody is maintaining. It may be. I just don't know. But, you know, it'd be something to encourage DEP or water departments or somebody to keep track of and start maintaining a database of those.
It could be compiled if someone is reviewing aerial photographs from time to time. At least see the big ones, such as Fred Levno's pictures of Lake Erie, where the whole end of the lake is obviously green. But I don't know who is keeping any kinds of data like that.
Well, I think it's lunchtime, so thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.